If we go out there and we look like we're having a bad day and not having a good time, then the guest isn't going to have a great experience either. And so it's not just the resilience, but it is still that standard of excellence of, hey, I'm out here to make a difference. And the best way that I do that is by making sure that I don't relax my standards when I'm out here, even if it's a little bit more challenging.
Welcome to Build Your Culture Brand with Dr. Jay Rains. Join us as we discover ways to define, measure, and grow your culture. We want to help you intentionally build a culture that fits you.
Hey leaders, welcome back to the Build Your Culture Brand podcast. I have with me today Ryan Twitchel from Chick-fil-A Mesa and Tempe in Phoenix, Arizona. Thanks for being on the show, Ryan.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much, Jay. Pleasure to be here.
So I've known Ryan for a few years and have coached him and his team for several years. And so I wanted to bring Ryan on today to unpack some just part of his leadership journey, but also some ways that they're using leadership coaching and tools in their organization. So Ryan, I know I was just looking at your, just kind of your history. You're with Brandon Barrett. He's the operator there. And I guess you've been there, about 11 and a half years?
Yeah, just a little over that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And then really congratulations on your new role. I know you've been serving as a senior director for a while, and we'll get into how Brandon has his organization set up in a minute. That's one of the questions that I think people are going to want to know is how he organizes two locations and kind of the organizational part of that. But you just recently were promoted, you were in a very operational role, and now you're in a role of Senior Director of Development. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks so much. You've been a big help in that whole process and journey, so appreciate it.
Well, it's been fun watching you just continue. You're an amazing leader when I met you, but you've just really found new ways to lead and multiply yourself and create multiplying leaders within your organization. So I can see why Brandon would want to have you in that role, because you're really a great multiplying leader. I know talking to Brandon, he was just really thrilled with how you promote culture in the organization and develop people. And so he wanted to give you a bigger opportunity for a bigger voice. And so he's done that for you. But just so that our listeners can kind of get to know you a little better and your leadership style, I like to ask this question about your superpower and your kryptonite. What is something about your leadership that kind of helps propel you forward, and what might kind of hold you back in leadership? What would you say would be a leadership superpower for you?
I really like this question. Allowed for a lot of introspection, and what I kept coming back to is I feel like I've got a really good gift for empathy, and have even tried to make sure that I don't take that for granted and work on taking that strength and making an even greater one. So really working on being a better listener recently, like, hey, how am I making sure that I'm actively listening? Am I listening to respond, or am I listening to understand? Especially in an operational role, we have people ask us questions all the time. And so we just get used to just firing responses back and forth. But I would think that would be something that I would count as a superpower.
That's a great superpower. And I know there's a lot of talk about that in the leadership circles right now about empathy. And Brene Brown has some really good stuff about empathy. And you're recently married. So I would think that would be a great superpower to bring to marriage too, right? To really, and I love how you said, I want to listen to understand. So that's powerful. So great. Congratulations on your marriage too. So.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Exciting season for sure.
So then, with every superpower, there's kryptonite. So what would work against you in your leadership?
Yeah, I think, often with this, like the superpower and the kryptonite are going to be related. And I think the kryptonite for me then can be still the tendency to downplay bad news or being hesitant with accountability. I've had to really, really work at that and look for those opportunities and figure out, like, hey, where's the alarm going off? Like, hey, don't miss this opportunity. If you don't share the accountability part of this conversation, you're actually doing a disservice. And I had counted it as a younger leader as being overly compassionate and, oh, this person doesn't feel seen or heard. I'm like, I'm doing them a disservice if I'm not taking the opportunity to say, hey, this is something we can fix right now. And it's worth fixing, even if it's hard.
I love it. Okay. And I think you're right. It's kind of like whatever is working for you, you're kind of what we're calling your superpower here. There's another side to that coin. It's the same coin, and there's often that superpower also opens up the door for a weakness. So tell me a little bit about this new role. I mean, let's back up just a minute. So I think one of the questions that I get as I work with if we're working with say a Chick-fil-A operator who has 2 locations or who is moving into 2 locations, and we're excited to share that we had actually 7 of our clients last year were awarded a second location. But one of the questions that comes to their mind, and I point them toward people like your operator and you to think about, how are we going to organize these 2 locations? We've always operated with 1. Now we've got to figure out a kind of a org structure for 2. And there's several different ways to slice that up. Could you just kind of unpack how Brandon has y'all, could you kind of paint a picture of your org structure and how y'all operate these 2 locations?
Yeah. So obviously Brandon being the head of the organization for us and making sure to cast a really clear vision, make sure that we're always staying on track for that. Any of the big decisions that we make and even the little ones we bring in the restaurant are going to line up with that. So it's been really valuable to have a really consistent mission statement where we want to make a difference. That's our big one, make a difference for our guests, for our team, and for the community that our restaurants are placed in. And then to help him achieve that, we've got Carrie is in the executive area director of operations. So she's really working closely with the senior directors at each location to just kind of follow that sort of stream. The senior directors essentially are almost like a general manager of the restaurant, but different in the conventional sense of a general manager. We still have support. Kayla, she just recently got promoted, and I'm going to feel bad and I'm going to get her title wrong, but like senior executive director of people. I believe she just passed a really cool certification. So she helps with like the onboarding and the HR thing. So that way the senior directors don't have to worry about that stuff so much. They get to focus a lot more on the operations in the restaurant, the development of their people. They're holding weekly meetings with their leaders to work on the store goals, their team goals, and then also leadership development. And we've got Laura, who Brandon has put in charge of like systems and processes essentially. And she's been an incredible help with making sure, hey, like, are we really following good systems? Is there a process for all of the things that we want to make sure that we're able to be consistent and repeatable on? So I've leaned on her heavily. Both of the restaurants have. She's great for food safety, for speed of service, for all of the cleanliness in the restaurants. And her scope goes beyond that too, but a little bit of a snapshot for her. And then my new role, as you mentioned before, I was in the senior director position at our Mesa location for a while. And our teams are split up kind of unconventionally. We can talk about that if we have some time for it. But recently moved into this role of the senior director of development, where Brandon had really noticed, hey, I think that we're missing out on some development opportunities. I think there may have been leaders that we could have developed even further, and we missed out. Maybe they got stagnant or even frustrated with a lack of development, decided to leave, or we didn't have the right tools around them. Maybe it was a season where a senior director was so caught up in the operations side of the business that it was difficult for them to spend that intentional time with the leaders the way that they needed to. And so I get to now be the resource for that and looking at different ways that I can do that, from one-on-one coaching to just sharing resources that I come across in my own professional development. But we have it kind of split that way. And then we can go down into the structure of the leadership in the stores if you want, but that's essentially the senior leadership team that the brand has created for our organizational structure.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And yeah, there's some interesting things about, how you've even structured each location, but thanks for helping us paint that picture of, so we kind of have this executive team that's looking at the entire enterprise. Really, you're in an enterprise role and kind of supporting, what Carrie is more operationally, like the authority lines go straight down from her into operations, but then y'all are coming in, in these supporting roles. You and Laura and Kayla are coming in to support kind of from the side in a way, and take on a specific area. But excited about your new role and just this big focus on development for leaders. So, Brandon and I talked about a little bit as you were kind of getting ready to move in this role, and one of the things he said to me was that you've just been able to really speak about culture and leadership in a very clear way. And that's one of the reasons why he elevated to this role, is because you just have a way of presenting it, and it's like it fits your DNA, it fits who you are to be able to talk about this kind of stuff. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that stuff on the wall behind you there. I remember that from about, I guess, what was that, 6 years ago? And
Yeah.
I remember we were at y'all were at the other offsite. We kind of did a whole thing, and we created that, what's now very formalized on the wall there. Tell me a little bit about how you call those your core values, and we would call it a culture brand. So just to kind of understand, so tell us a little bit about those core values and how do they work in your organization to help?
Yeah, I think the simplest way that I get to present it, and when I was in the senior director role, I would present this to somebody on their very first day in the restaurant. They'd already heard it twice in a couple orientations that we do in this office before people ever, set foot in the restaurant in a uniform. But when I would sit down with them, I would say, again, that mission statement that I said before, make a difference. That's our why. That's the big why behind everything that we do, especially something that takes extra energy or time or resources. Like, why do we say my pleasure instead of just saying no problem or you're welcome? Why do we cook in 100% refined peanut oil instead of a cheaper oil that's not going to taste as great? We do all of these things because they make a difference. And then with what we call the core values, and as you said, the culture brand, like, that's our how. Like, how do we get that done? And really like the buckets and kind of categories that you've put things in, where like you can see the wall behind me, like toughness, like, hey, that's results. Like, how are we being resilient in difficult moments? And how are we also making sure that we hold ourselves to a high standard of excellence all the time? And then the teaming aspect, we've said that's going to be respect for us. How are we taking care of one another in the way that we communicate, the way that we behave in the restaurant, the way that we approach challenging conversations, the way that we encourage one another? And then integrity, that personal character piece. It's more like, hey, like, this is who you are, and we're trying to figure that out in the interview process. But if you're in our restaurants, we've got a good feeling about it. But we're going to make sure that we still keep a pulse on it all the time. If we see something that kind of steps out of line on that integrity piece, we know that that's going to translate into all the other categories as well too. So that's really helped our organization in all the coaching that we do as well, because it takes pressure off of a conversation feeling like it might be a personal one, to saying, hey, no, this is just, are we still aligned and fulfilling this mission and living it out? Because if we're not doing all three of these things, and we're not really winning. So we want to make sure that we don't lose track of one category.
Thank you. No, that's tremendous. Thanks for unpacking that for our listeners. And for those who are listening via audio, just he has a Venn diagram behind him on the wall painted in there, and it has these three big words: toughness, respect, and integrity. And the idea is that those have to converge for them to really accomplish their mission. So Ryan, you're using this language, at the highest levels of the organization. How does it help cascading on down to the front? How far into the organization do you feel like these ideals are kind of working themselves forward?
Yeah, great question. One of the big things that I'm really trying to work on right now in my new role is making sure that these words and concepts are finding their way into conversation a lot more regularly. I think we see a lot of the behaviors aligning with them. And I've been working with a lot of leaders to say, hey, like, if we use these really well, daily. Like in all of our conversations, we have them posted in the restaurant in multiple areas. I'm like, hey, it can become background noise if we don't use it. So if we use them all the time, though, then it makes the wins that we've had, if we can point to why it was a win in relation to one of these core values, that makes it a lot easier to create consistency and repeatability in the restaurant. And then if you have to challenge somebody on it, they can clearly see, oh, I wanted it this way, but then I wasn't winning in it when I did this. So I need to adjust my behavior to make sure that I'm consistently living it out. So working on making that a consistent, vocabulary for our leaders, but it makes it so much easier. The ones that I've been able to talk to, like, oh, accountability becomes a whole lot easier if we're using this stuff consistently.
That's great. That's great. I love, Brandon's a sports fan. He was in sports even through college, and he is big into rodeo too with his family. And so this whole idea of toughness really kind of fits his character. I love that y'all selected that word to mean excellence. But as you talk about toughness with your team, how are some ways that gets misunderstood? Say in the drive-through about what y'all mean by toughness.
I think that's the job of the leaders, is for us to clarify that for sure. And if we do a good job up front, then hopefully there's not a lot of confusion. It definitely gets used in the drive-through. Like you said, we're in Phoenix, and so it gets really hot during the summertime. And we just tell our team that it's real warm out there. But so toughness is going to be not just taking orders outside on IPOS, and we make sure that we're doing a good job of taking care of our team with the shade and the ice vests and all of that. But what I really challenged the team when I would sit down on a first day with somebody that was going to be on our front of house team, say, hey, toughness isn't just being out there. Toughness is still making sure that the core four is present. Like the guests are still getting the same experience that they would get no matter what. Because if we go out there and we look like we're having a bad day and not having a good time, then the guest isn't going to have a great experience either. And so it's not just the resilience, but it is still that standard of excellence of, hey, I'm out here to make a difference. And the best way that I do that is by making sure that I don't relax my standards when I'm out here, even if it's a little bit more challenging.
Well, Ryan, you know that I'm actually writing a book about culture brand, and every once in a while we'll be talking. I'll be like, "Oh my goodness, that's got to go in the book." So, Ryan, your name might not end up in the book, but some of the things we've talked about will definitely be there. And one of the things that we've over the years kind of talked through on culture brand, or what y'all call core values, is that the core values are the same ideas for the newest member on the team all the way up to the most senior member of the team. But what might be some differences? Like if you think about that in layers, how do the core values, how are they different for a newest team member as compared to someone who is at the highest level of responsibility?
Yeah. So with the core values, I mean, there's just some concepts that will always be foundational. Integrity is kind of my favorite one to point to with that one, because integrity at a team member level, we're like, hey, we expect you to be dependable. We expect you to be at work for the shifts that you're scheduled for. We expect you to be on time and be in the correct uniform. And as we move up the organizational chart, like that doesn't go away. We still expect that from everybody. But then when you get to the level of like even a team leader, I talk to them about, hey, like it's no longer enough for you just to show up and be willing to work and hopefully do a great job. But you have to show up ready to have a positive impact on all of the people that are following you. I kind of told like our team on the Mesa Monday, Wednesday, Friday team that throughout like December, it's a really busy month. And I was like, hey guys, whether this is fair or not, you're not allowed to have a bad day. This is a really busy season. And if you show up and you have a negative attitude, the team is going to see that and they're going to say, oh, that's how I should respond to this day. That's how I should feel about how this day is going or is going to go. And so we have to be really aware of that and make sure to model the behavior that we want to see from the team. And so the integrity just continues to move up and it goes throughout the organization. I know I look at integrity and, we talk about like the humility and the strength of character. I'm like, okay, I need to be even more intentional about my own personal development. And I need to model that really well. So that way others can see that and say, oh, that's something that I need to be doing for an integrity piece for myself as well. I can't just stay here and be stagnant. I need to make sure that I am holding myself accountable to these goals that I've set for myself.
I love it. Yeah, and I love the way you're developing that, even as a deeper resource on attaching it to their role clarity, their role definition, so they can look at their specific role and see how these values actually play in real time behavior for that role. So I know that's something you kind of have in your future that you're working on developing even more. Well, Ryan, I know that right now you're actually getting DISC certified. DISC is a personality assessment that we've used with your team for several years, and y'all have used very effectively. What are some of the benefits of using a personality assessment on a business team or a leadership team?
Yeah. Great question. I love DISC. And especially as I get to learn more and more about it, I'm like, oh, wow, there's nuances here that I'm really excited to dig into. But I think at the surface, what I really appreciate about it, especially for our new leaders, is this level of like self-awareness and feeling like seen and heard, like, oh, wow, like I do respond that way. And maybe they realized it and maybe they didn't. And we sometimes encourage them like, hey, like, don't just leave this at the restaurant. Take this to your significant other or a family member that knows you really well and see if they see this kind of stuff happening too. So I love the validation that comes with it. But then it comes with a charge or a challenge of like, hey, like now that you know this about yourself, take a look at the people that communicate differently than you do. DISC is just all about behavior and communication. It's like, hey, like try to think back to a time when you were trying to work with somebody and you just couldn't seem to come together on it. And what was your part in that? Was this person wired differently than you? What can you observe about their behavior that makes you think, oh, I might need to make an adjustment. I might need to change the way that I am presenting this case or this conversation. Maybe I need to have more structure because they're like a higher D, or maybe I need to make sure to open up with a warm, hey, how are you doing today? Good morning, because that person is a higher I or S. So that's been really helpful. And we've really seen a huge impact, especially again with our younger leaders as they learn to navigate, like, how do I improve my soft skills? I thought I was a good communicator because I get along with my family and my friends. And it's like, yeah, but what about people that are different than you? So could talk about DISC all the time if we wanted, but yeah.
No, that's great. Thanks for unpacking that a little bit with us with DISC. I mean, I've been using it for quite a few years and I still find nuances that are helpful as I work with people or even look at my own DISC. So one of the things I've noticed, and we can get into this as we kind of think through how DISC then matches with culture brand, because those have to kind of play together and work together. And there's some interesting things about how those become very powerful together. But, as you think about those personality profiles, you and I both, we like to caution people like, hey, don't, just because it says you're this, that doesn't give you permission to just be an immature D or I or S or C. You have to grow in maturity in that way and really up your game. But then also, not only as you become more mature, but like you were talking about, like if I could understand how they are in their personality, it gives me a chance to approach them in a way that's more inviting and more matched to their personality. I think some people look at those assessments and they think, okay, well, I've got to round myself out and be good in all 4 areas, but that's really not possible. It's more like I see how I tend to lean, and then I also see how they need me to present. And in those moments I can adjust, but that doesn't mean I've changed my entire personality. So thanks for helping kind of give some examples around that. So Ryan, one of the things you and I've talked about extensively is this interplay now that, okay, you have these DISC profiles and all of your leaders have been DISC profiled, so they know their personality and how they lean. And then you have these core values that you're saying, okay, we need to join together on these core values and have these behaviors. So how do those interplay together? How do you use both of those tools in a way that really ups everybody's game?
So, like you just mentioned, DISC is all about like the behaviors, and so each of these three core values of the culture brand, the only thing that we really have to go off of is observable behavior, and so we can look at how does somebody's DISC maybe play into their toughness or their respect or their integrity, and I think we also have to be cautious not to say like, oh, because you are a high D, you're going to be great at toughness. Toughness can look different. And like you mentioned, there's a level of maturity and immaturity that can come with each of these DISC profiles. So then we can look at someone and say, hey, like, your toughness, like you were really pushing for results in this moment. And we really appreciate that. But let's look at this respect part too. Maybe the toughness and the respect are a little bit more related than we think about. Because in order to lead with excellence, we need to make sure everybody's on board, and we need to come back to how are we working together as a team. So it allows us to have even more structured language around, oh, do we need to talk about your DISC behaviors and the ways that we can use our influence greater if we have better self-awareness and awareness of the person that we're communicating with?
Great answer. No, thank you for helping us see how those play together. I think about your mission is make a difference, right? And so the way I see this, that thing on your wall right there, those three words are converging. And really where they converge is where you're able to say, if we can get these three to work together, that's when we know we're doing our best to make a difference, because we're leading with excellence on one hand, but yet we're collaborating on this other hand. And then we're showing up with, dependable attitude and coachability on the third part. And so when those three converge, is when we're at our best and we're able to, like you said, make a difference to your team, to your community, and really have that mission central impact. So I love how those come together. I'm so proud of what your team has done and the successes you've had. I know this year there's probably going to be some big wins we're hoping for. So we're excited to see all that your team is accomplishing together.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been instrumental in the process. So grateful for, said the past 6 years of really getting to fine tune this stuff and put it into action and tweak it, push and pull in different areas and see, how are we doing this well? Oh, maybe we need to come back and look at this a little bit different, or focus on this area for a little bit and really make sure that we know how to own it before we move on to the next thing. So grateful for your mentorship through all of it.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey. I'm looking forward to the years ahead if I can continue on your journey. So it's exciting to see what your team's doing there in your part of Phoenix, Arizona, which is such a growing city, amazing place. So, and Ryan, again, congratulations on your new role. You're just kind of a month into this, but I can already see this is a perfect fit for you. I think the team is really going to just accelerate with your ability to really focus in on that leadership development piece and just help everybody level up and throughout the organization.
Yeah, thanks so much. No, I'm excited for the different level of influence and way that I get to bring that to the restaurants for sure. It's been a lot of fun.
So Ryan, here's this is a deep question, and so I just want to open up an opportunity to kind of see the insight into maybe a more challenging part of your story. So the question is, what is a failure? What's a perceived failure at the time that ended up propelling you forward?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think when I look back on it, this ties into what I mentioned as my kryptonite before, where I would think that I was being really compassionate and very empathetic to the point where I wasn't holding people accountable the way that they should. And the clearest observation that I can think back to in my own performance on that was we were kind of just coming out of that season of like the fight for talent. I think a lot of people listening to this can probably remember that season where it's like, man, we're just not getting a lot of great candidates coming through. It's really difficult to make sure that we've got enough people in the restaurant to live out our mission and make a difference for our guests. And so I ended up just not really holding people accountable to attendance policies. There were people that would kind of call out or be a little bit late. And I was determined to kind of try to fix that and lead through it by being really, really forgiving to the point where it was a fault, and I was actually doing a disservice to the rest of the team that had to work with those same people that I was being too forgiving for. And so I just struggled to keep as many people as we needed, and lost some good people because I was allowing this poor behavior and performance to become a part of the culture in the restaurant. So I had to really wake up to that. And thankfully I've got leaders around me that let me know, like, hey, we're seeing this, and it's easier sometimes from the outside perspective to see, but it's becoming pervasive, and it's starting to become something that is more difficult for you to come out of. And so had to really change the way that I communicated that. If somebody wasn't coming in and showing up for their team, I was like, hey, you're going to be off the schedule for a week. And then I would make sure to communicate to the team working with them why was that happening? Like, hey, that person, they weren't showing toughness. Some small setback would keep them from coming in for the day, and they weren't showing you guys respect. They weren't here for you when you needed them, and their integrity obviously was lacking. And so they're failing in all three of these core values and culture brand areas. And it's not fair for you guys who are showing up every day for this person to be getting paid the same amount as you. I'm not showing you guys respect by allowing that to continue. So that's why I'm making things a little bit more difficult in this moment by saying they're not going to be on the schedule for this week. But I think that it's going to be better for all of us in the long run. So it took me a few months of really limping through that season to figure it out. And again, grateful for teammates around me that were not willing to let it go. And like, if you're not going to save yourself, we're going to tell you how you need to save yourself in this moment. So again, just all of the stuff that we talked about coming together in that, like I was failing, but I was surrounded by a team that wanted the best for me, saw that I needed help, and made sure that I understood how to make that happen, and then held me accountable to that in the process. And, don't love thinking back to that season, except when I get to reflect on how do I share that wisdom with somebody else, a person that is really empathetic and thinks, oh, like I'm letting this little thing slide. This appearance standard isn't super important. Like, hey, if you don't do that well, it's going to snowball, and you need to make sure that we catch that stuff quickly, because if we allow little cracks to start to form in our culture, then the big ones come a lot faster than you think.
Love that story. Thank you for sharing that transparency behind it, and just that challenging time. It's interesting that this failure story, what we're calling a failure story, is closely tied to your superpower of empathy. And that at that time, empathy was kind of working against you in the side of making it hard to hold people accountable. So thanks for sharing that. But also, man, good for you to receive the feedback. I know for most of us, feedback's really tough to receive. And how did that impact you? I mean, as you first heard that feedback, what was the reaction on the inside of you?
I think any of us that are human, like pride was the first thing that popped up. And I was like, no, if I'm doing the things that I'm doing, it's because I think that they're right, and I think there's good reason for it. Yeah. I'm an intelligent person, and I'm not just doing these things without really thinking about them. But I had to, embody that integrity piece that we've got on the wall there, where it's humility. Like, okay, I'm in a season where I'm not getting better. Things are not moving forward the way that I thought they would if I continued to do the things that I'm doing. And so I need to be coachable. If I am telling our team leaders and, directors and other people that coachability is really, really important, and being willing to take feedback and implement it, then I have to trust that if I'm receiving it, it is for my own, best interest as well too. I had to swallow the pride in that, and then be willing to work at it. But then was thankfully also able, because of our organizational structure, to see, hey, we've got 3 other teams, and the ones that are doing this well, they're not going through the same thing that I'm going through. So this isn't somebody just saying, hey, try this and see if it works. I'm like, no, I can see the results of doing this the right way, and I need to make sure that I make that a part of what I'm doing. And it took that recognizing, you said it was my superpower of like showing empathy for these people who were, not really showing up and doing stuff right. But what I missed in that was I wasn't showing good empathy and compassion for the people that were showing up and doing everything right. And so I had to figure that out, like, wow, like I'm allowing these people who are underperformers to have a really negative experience on the other people that are showing up for me and doing a great job. So I really misplaced where I was putting that.
Thank you. No, that's incredible. That's incredible. You had it kind of misdirected, and so it became a shift of direction of your empathy. Thank you for that. That's really good. I also really like, Ryan, how you're referring to those words behind you on the wall in a way that is it's an assessment. And so those values they're really actions, behaviors. And so you're measuring your own behavior against the three of those, but then you're also, looking at those people that say we're showing up late, and you're evaluating them based on those core values that are actionable, they're measurable. So I love how you've incorporated your core values, your culture brand into even thinking about business decisions like holding people accountable and the why behind it. So good job. Love what you're doing. So proud of your work. And thanks for sharing this story with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here, and you've been incredibly helpful throughout that whole process for me.
Hey, to our leaders out there who are thinking about growing your team and developing your culture, as you're listening to Ryan today, learning more about how they've developed their own core values or their culture brand and how it's helped them in their organization, we'd love to work with you and your team and help you develop a tool that's customized to your team in a way that really exhibits your DNA, but also has all of these concepts packed into it in a way that's ready for you to use, that helps you with coaching your team, doing discipline, hiring, letting people go, promoting. All of these areas, your culture brand can have a big impact on your team. So thanks to Ryan today for sharing more about how they're using it in their organization.
Thank you for listening to Build Your Culture Brand with Dr. Jay Rains. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, comment, and share. You can also visit our website at buildyourculturebrand.com. We would like to note that Leaders Q serves individual owner-operators and their teams and is not affiliated, endorsed by, or in any way officially connected with Chick-fil-A Incorporated.